These dudes are always on point. So I'll introduce myself again as a matter of course from the music. I am Pamela Scott Johnson. I serve as Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs. I'm also a 1982 Spelman alumna, and thank you. However we do it, we didn't do that in the old days, but I like it. Other hand, okay, got you. We are really thrilled to have you here. Now, I'm excited to be here because I know when Liz invites me to stuff or tells me I need to show up, I know it's going to be great because I love art. But we are in for a real treat. But my job is simply to say welcome on behalf of our president and our administration and all of us on Spelman's campus. We are happy that you're here. We are assuming that you're going to be a friend of the museum. But more importantly, this is really a great opportunity. Thank you for spending your evening with us, and not just with us as a college and as a museum, but with this artist. I mean, you know, Liz kind of gives me an opportunity, especially when I travel, to say, okay, where are you going? So if I'm going to DC or San Francisco, she'll say, I can't even say San Francisco, but she'll say, go by this museum. We are really in for a treat. Artist Williams, thank you so much for being with us, for being able to integrate yourself into how we work with our students, and I love it. So I'm going to take the opportunity after welcoming you, having you kind of be on our campus and really be in a spirit of kind of calm embodiment. Now that's for this room, but if you look at my little sisters, they're all studying for exams and trying to get ready. So whatever positive energy you might share with them, but their being in this space really is about our commitment for how we develop young women to lead the world. And we are just so pleased and grateful that you are sharing that with us. And I'm so pleased and grateful to bring Liz up to the stage to introduce our artists. Again, welcome to campus and enjoy the evening. Liz?
Thank you so much to Provost Pamela Scott Johnson, and thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for braving Atlanta traffic, getting on planes, trains, automobiles to be here because we have a really special program. My name is Liz Andrews. I'm the director of the Spelman College Museum of Fine Arts, which is the only museum in the country dedicated to art by and about Black women. We're in a very, very special place in this museum and, of course, on the beautiful grounds of Spelman College. We are so thankful to Amanda Williams for her generous spirit, her brilliant art, and for taking not just a couple months or weeks, but years to work with us on this project and to really engage students. Because I think when you walk through the galleries, the art is incredible. We've got Amanda Williams in conversation with Black artists from Atlanta Collections. But when you look at the labels that say, we say what Black this is, those are labels written by students from the Atlanta University Center about Amanda's work. And it's an incredible thing to walk into a museum and have the information on the wall not be from this stoic institutional voice saying, this is how you should think about this art. No. Kai Cook from Spelman College said, this is what I think about this. This is what we say. Brooklyn Mangrum said, this is what I think about this work. So we're so thankful, Amanda, for you working with us, staying with us, weathering the storm, and there's a beautiful exhibition to show for it. I have to thank my staff. Thank you to Karen Comer-Lowe, who persevered through many asks of trying to work with Amanda Williams, but the time was not right until it was coming to Spelman. So thank you, Karen, for curating this exhibition. Thank you to Shannon Kimbrough for arranging the incredibly complex things that go into all of the behind the scenes, getting these works from across the country here together in Atlanta. This specific program is the result of the blood, sweat, and tears of some very important people. Dr. Brandy Pettyjohn, the curator of exhibitions, put so much time and effort into making sure that this was possible. and our museum coordinator, Cherie Franklin. Without these people, we would not be here tonight. And always, always, always thank you to our museum ambassadors, our students who work in the museum and make this all happen. So let's get into the conversation. Tonight, we have, on the occasion of nearly going in toward the closing of the exhibition organized by Spelman College Museum, We Say What Black This Is. We are helping to launch a book that comes out of this same series of paintings, What Black Is This You Say? And so I'll let them get into the conversation, but Amanda Williams, as you all know, is an incredible artist, born and raised in Chicago, MacArthur winning, trained as an architect, works in color, thinks about race, thinks about space in so many different types of ways, and in this exhibition through abstract painting. And then, of course, there is the incredible musician Corinne Bailey-Rae, who so many of us have loved for so many years, Grammy Award winning, and also a contributor to this book. So with that, I want to invite our guests up to the stage, and we can enjoy our moment.
Welcome. This is so wonderful. I feel like Spelman's like my second home now. Somebody said, you have to get an apartment here. It's like, yes, claim it. I am just so excited and honored to be in conversation tonight with Corinne Bailey-Rae. It's rare that your heroes can become your friends. And so while we are connected all the time and talk through creativity and mommyhood and all kinds of things, this will be our first public conversation, and it's really wonderful to kind of share it with all of you, the process that I went through with this project and this book launch. This is the launch of the book, and there's nowhere else that it should be but Spelman. So thank you. They moved mountains to make sure that this could happen, so I just feel so honored and grateful that was the case. And so I'm going to do a little bit of setup to give you all a kind of understanding of how we arrived here. And then Corinne and I are going to just talk through a few things. One is creativity, how artists actually work. And then we're going to talk about this collaboration and Corinne's contribution to the book and what that looks like as part of an extension of a creative process. Let's see. A little hard to see. So the book, many of you have gotten signatures. Is Blackity Black, Black, Black. We wanted to make the spine black, but you wouldn't have been able to read it in the bookstore, so we had to to give it some color. But as Dr. Andrews said, the project itself started with What Black Is This You Say? And so this came about during the pandemic when all of us were kind of shuttered in our homes. Right about the moment where I realized it was not going to be a quick sort of few-week thing. And then the dread set in. The D-Nice night was like, maybe the world's going to end, so we should all party together online. That's kind of when it set in for me. We were not leaving the house. And so I started this process of trying to figure out how I was going to make art at home with 2 small children and a husband. And luckily, we didn't have a dog then. But, just kind of all locked in together. And really was trying to make sense of the moment like everybody else. And so what we're going to find 20 or 30 years from now is that artists do what artists always do. So we don't start with some magical thing and then get to a kind of A to Z. We're constantly thinking about ideas and using our artistry to cope, quite frankly. And so in June, when the sort of call for a Blackout Tuesday came from the music industry, actually, to put a black square, I overthink things. And so I took all day long and did not put my black square up until like 11:30 at night. My husband's like, your time is running out. I was like, do they mean my skin? Do they mean what black? What? You can't just say black? Which one? And so as a joke, I started saying, Andriana Furr's black. You put your child's name in your utility bill black, like all these different blacks. And so every day was like a reaction to the chaos and craziness that was going on. Unfortunately, we're right back into it. We had that breath where we forgot
how traumatic it was on a daily basis. And so I used, as Black people often do, satire as a way for myself initially to cope, and then eventually kind of share that with the world. And so this is kind of what the screen started to look like. So I posted for about 5 months. There are about 150 of these posts. And it really became an exercise for myself to think about this idea of Black as a color and also as a racial signifier. So what Black? So I'm an early riser, and so it often like snap just before the sun was coming out, snap my hand, snap a shadow, like really just trying to just snap things. And then there'd be these kind of off the cuff, satirical things that I would say. And they often were reactions to whatever was happening on that given day. But, you know, this day, my daughter's not cooperating with Sunday Hair Day. You know, this is, you know, one of the many times when all of a sudden we're supposed to be a certain way, good or bad, kind of flattening us across the board. Obviously, regretting how we had gotten into the moment that we were in, and maybe doing some introspection about what we assumed having a Black president might have meant, what it did or didn't mean, what the reaction to that was going to be, and you can obviously see the kind of offshoot of that. And so in the midst of all of this, I received a phone call from the Storefront for Art and Architecture, which is a historic organization in Soho, always known for kind of experimental exhibition making and artwork around art and architecture. And so it sits on a corner of a street in Soho, which at that point in the 60s, when it started, was a little bit sketchy. It's not the Soho we have now. And so they really wanted to engage the sidewalk. So they have this large, very thin gallery space with 12 panels that open up to the sidewalk. So in the summers, they can engage this sidewalk. So again, this is a moment where we're not sure we're going back into public space. And so they wanted to activate that storefront, both kind of remotely digital works, but also what would happen when people were convening again. What kind of engagement would they have with one another? What would that look like when we've been taught now to social distance? We have a whole generation of students, many of whom are graduating, who had to endure what should have been their coming of age of high school and college in that moment. So what does it look like to gather and be in community? For me, it was a little bit terrifying. I've always made public activations in my own neighborhoods, people that look like me, so to be putting Blackness on Front Street literally was a little bit uncomfortable. And so it was a stretch and a push for me as an artist to really think about what does it mean to go from this digital space into this very public space. So this is an image of, those are my two daughters, me, and I think that's Camille Bacon, who ends up being very important to this story, and I'll talk about her in a little bit. But we were painting the existing facade, which had kind of been like a concrete gray, all Black, and then we were going to start adding some of these captions onto that storefront. And so as part of that process, we had to take those squares that you saw and kind of reduce them down to monochromatic colors, and to think about which 12 we wanted to put on the facade, and then what colors we wanted to use. And so these are just a few of the images that capture that, and images that are also part of the publications that many of you have gotten tonight just to see. And so you can see examples of what happens when they start to kind of open out in the summertime, and you really get a sense of what it means for the full sidewalk to be activated. They bring chairs out, and there really is a dialogue. But to have this kind of way in which these captions are speaking in analog at the same time that they're speaking in the digital format was really kind of disorienting and interesting to see what that reaction would be. And so you see also then that in real time I'm making a translation between this public version of the work, and then I'm beginning to also make the painting. So the paintings you all see in the exhibition really marked the first time that these works that I was making during the pandemic have all come together. They were largely sold either through art fairs or through my gallery representation in Chicago. So they have gone almost immediately from galleries to private homes. So this is one of the few times that they'll be publicly seen and then seen all together. So you really do get a sense of what it's like to process Blackness in this way. But there was no other place that I wanted that kind of conversation to happen than here at Spelman. I thought that this really unique opportunity for these students, for these Black women, to say what Blackness is to them and to use these paintings and engagement with me in real time to do that. And so I want to come to a very special Black. Stevie Wonder is one of my favorite humans in life. I've never met Stevie, but one of my favorite humans in life. And so there's a moment where I've made the post, and the post is, what Black is this? You say you wish you could see the inside of Stevie Wonder's eyelids so you too could have inner visions. And it is beautiful, and it sounds very deep, but it literally was the end of the night, and I was doing like this, and then I was like, oh, look. You know, so we've all done that. So, so you know, this kind of deeper understanding, though, about artistry and beauty and the translation of so much that Stevie Wonder has done. And when Jose, who is the head of the Storefront for Art and Architecture, began thinking about wanting to memorialize this public work as a book, we started to think about what would that process mean to create something that felt like you wandered upon the sidewalk in the way that many people encountered the public work. And so Camille, who I mentioned earlier, who's a graduate of Smith College, I'd met her while I was in residence there, and who's an emerging writer and sort of publicist in her own right. I sort of handed her this project and asked her to help me work through. And so we came up with a list of contributors. And so I knew no one other than Corinne could talk about Stevie Wonder with me. So the invitation was extended, and Corinne was in the process of not only launching her amazing work, Black Rainbows, but also a publication that she worked on for many years through her residency at the Astor Gates Stony Island Arts Bank in Chicago, a fellow artist. And he's actually a sort of precipitous of how we first met in the first place when you were first coming to do that residency. And so I thought it'd be great for us to have a conversation about process, creativity, Stevie Wonder. I'm going to share the page that is Corinne's. And so when I called, I said, do you think you might want to like make a little contribution to this book? And she said, okay, well, what should I do? It's like, just write some notes about Stevie. And she's like, what for? How should it be? It's like, just whatever, just sketch, whatever comes to mind, and we're going to kind of turn this into what this artistry is. So I think this is a good moment to maybe pause and bring you into the conversation and just talk a little bit about what that moment was like and what that process is like. And this is the first time you're seeing the result.
So
How's it? Yeah, a little lag. You got it now. You got it now. I was really honoured that you asked me, and I was really drawn into this title and this idea of inner visions. And I had recently read the Kevin Quashie book about the sublime and about the Black interiority. And I thought a lot about that with Stevie's work, how there's this turning inwards and this inward seeing, but that he's seeing in order to help something to be realized. So it's not like he's just dreaming and it's kind of abstracted, but that he's seeing our sort of present moment, but he's also seeing into being a world, a sort of utopian world. And so much of that record, Inner Visions, is about, you know, a future world where there's peace, where there's prosperity, where there's enough for everyone, where it's the end of poverty. So it's really, you know, Stevie Wonder's work is so beautiful and in some cases so gentle. You know, it's not like listening to Rage Against the Machine or, you know, a song with screeching, you know, a punk record. And I think because of that, a lot of people aren't really engaged with how radical the work is. You know, he's not dismantling the form of music, which a lot of artists do, but in doing that, their message often reaches less people. You know, Stevie's got this thing of like, I see it like, you know, that phrase, a spoonful of sugar helps a medicine go down. And I feel like in engaging with Stevie Wonder's work, it is so beautiful, and it's coming into you and into your body and into your cells in this beautiful way. It's washing through you, but lyrically it is very radical, you know, not just in its time, but it's looking at poverty, it's looking at racism, it's looking at institutions which need to be dismantled, it's looking at violence, it's looking at how cities are planned, and imagining, like a song like Saturn, you know, imagining a contrasting world. And it's all been seen in this kind of third eye that I think about, you know, in the visions and the artwork. It shows a kind of beam coming from the world kind of into Stevie's third eye here, and also, I guess, radiating from that eye out into the world as well. So when you talked about, you know, the black that's on the inside of Stevie Wonder's eyelids, I thought of that place, that sort of singular, those kind of shades of colours, and how they opened up to a whole spectrum of things that could be seen internally and voiced through his music, but that they were being used to project into the world, to make this work happen, to draw people's attention to these issues, and to and kind of, you know, imagine, just like a Yoko Ono, you know, John Lennon's lyrics for Imagine, you know, let's imagine this world in order to see the transformation.
And you know, when you were thinking about both conversations that we'd had, but also this idea of what it might mean to just contribute notes or sketches, can you talk a little bit about, is this typical for your own process? Do you feel like you do this, or were you like, I'll do something for Amanda and send? Like, how was that portion of the process?
I remember learning at school with this teacher. To me, it was a new technique, but this might be something that you guys have all been doing since you were 5 years old, but mind mapping, the mind map. So to me, sometimes when I'm asked about a thing, I find it really hard to think in a sort of linear way. Like, this is the beginning, and you have to start the beginning, and then you work through, then you get to the middle, and then you get to the end. There's a conclusion that refers back to the introduction. I find it really hard to think like that, and I find it so much easier to start with a blank page and to kind of put the central idea in the middle, and then to have these kind of spokes radiating out. And that's, you know, that's sometimes if I'm thinking about songs, you know, I wrote this song about Betty Starr and David Hammons, and so that was, you know, the titles of their songs and phrases and things that I had thought about when I had seen their work, you know. And so, you know, when I wrote the lyrics for this song, it was just a mind map of a lot of titles, and then things like, you know, glitter and grease and black hair will be there, or, you know, just you know, walking around the Field Museum in Chicago, you know, as imagining David Hammons and Betty Starr as friends, which they, you know, are and were. And so then when I had this thing, I didn't write the lyrics to it, you know, then I just sung over this music, and it was sort of 10 minutes of like wandering through this mind map, you know, so I didn't have to think about writing it down in order. And I do find that I need a kind of more fluid process. You know, I often don't begin at the beginning for any of the songs that I write. You know, I like to think about circles, you know, so when I write my chords, I sort of try and find something that's circular in terms of the harmony, like how one chord leads to another. There's like, here we start, and are we in tension, or is the chord rested, or does it feel tense? If it feels tense, and eventually it's got to resolve, but I want where it resolved to kind of set up the first chord again, so it's in tension. And, you know, one of my favorite songs, Like a Star, it has this kind of circle that can just kind of go round and round and round, and that's how I like it to be. So whenever I do finish that song on stage, you know, it finishes on this last chord of the sequence, but that chord wants to resolve to the first one, so it never feels like it's quite finished. So I always feel like whenever I play that song, it's mostly at the end of my shows, that it's never really finished, and that's why I like to leave an unfinished thing. You know those classical pieces of music that always had like dum 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 da, 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 dum 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 dum. You know, it's like it's called a cadence, or it's like you know where it's going when it lands on that chord one or that home. You know, and I always say, you know, that was a very particular time in music where those, you know, the rules were there, but then the first person who breaks that rule and makes something seem uncertain, it's unsettling to the audience. But to me, that thing of the circle, that the song is going to keep moving, that the song is going to keep making itself, and then if you're really lucky in performance, the song, you know, it's like you get this kind of spiraling up. You know, I once played Like a Star, and it was with Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter, because I was doing something with Herbie, and then I guess they just asked me to do that one song. And I remember it just starting this kind of like cycle thing that just kind of went up and up, and it got its own. And Wayne was, you know, soloing on, you know, what was started off as my song, you know, and I just stopped singing and I just played it round and round. But I could have easily played that for like hours. 3 hours. Yeah, just hours and hours. And even in the jam, it was like 20 minutes, 25 minutes of just like Wayne kind of spiraling on these ideas. And I always say, you know, when you play with people that are so much better than you, you sort of get caught in the updraft of their ability. So I felt like I was able to kind of like sing things and play things that I hadn't ever been able to do, because they're like up here. So just by being up here, they're gonna just suck me up. Just suck me up. So that thing of the mind map and the spiral and the circle, they're shapes that make sense to me. That, you know, I always start my shows in a kind of awkward way.
Yes.
Sort of, kind of, because that's what I'm like, but also deliberately to kind of just shake the energy out a little bit. You know, I never come on like, I mean, I don't have this kind of shows, but, you know, some people will get like ascend from the ceiling or, you know, push up, or like there'll be an overture and then you come out and like, I always just kind of like shuffle along and I'll be like, hi, it's so long. I don't know. I want people to know, like, it's sort of the beginning, but it's kind of not the beginning, because we're just picking up from where we just were last night.
Right.
And it's all a continuum. And it's like, this bit is live and in front of people, but then the sort of conversation carries on when I'm trying to get to sleep at night, and it carries on because it's the thing I'm thinking of when I wake up in the morning, and it's what I'll take into the studio, and it's what I'll take when I write in my notebooks. Like, it's all, there's either like people watching or not watching, or, you know, I just want it to feel natural, and I want it to be authentic. You know, I'm not a performer. I didn't go to stage school. I'm not like also an actor who also is a tap dancer. But, you know, I'm not sort of trained in that way, you know, so I just try and make it feel like, you know, just like under, I don't know.
No, I'm
like
always
in some way
amazed. We have to like sneak time, right, to see each other. You're coming into town and I'm going to be there in 15 minutes. And I'm always amazed because we're spending time just before you're going to go on stage. And she has children, I have children. My children think they're babysitting her children.
which they are. It's great.
Really the reverse is happening. And then you're just sort of like, oh, it's time. And they were like, do you need a moment to yourself? Like, no, just come on. And then we're just all kind of like, just sneaking out right ahead of you. And then with the transformation you can make, I think that for me, that's been so powerful across media. Most of my friends are visual artists or architects, my creative friends. I have friends in the audience who are not. I have a lot of friends. But it really is this idea of like demystifying the idea that an artist kind of starts and stops at a certain point. And so this idea of the sketch is like so powerful to me that you're also working this way. Pablo Whaley, who's a Atlanta resident, also a contributor, he's a musician and a mathematician. And we too did this process several years ago where he sent what he called sketches, and they were little snippets of music. I actually owe Corinne a contribution to her future book. I didn't make it into the last book, but she sent me, I think, a SoundCloud, right, with these sketches, and I was like blown away. It was the album, but just in these snippets that then I got to watch evolve. And so for me, I didn't know what it would look like, but I knew that there would be a visual version of that kind of process. And so that was exciting because I can imagine that, as you said, Stevie Wonder is someone who kind of operates in another plane for so many reasons, that it is just a continuum. He's an artist in the truest sense of the word. And so I didn't know what to expect, but this was
this was exactly right. Each kind of contribution is kind of following a different way to express oneself. So Eric Williams is a chef in Chicago, and he offered a pork chop recipe from his grandmother. So each thing is kind of reacting to what that Blackness is, but in the authenticity of the contributors. And so it's so beautiful then that we have one of the few that's a kind of complete oeuvre of the way that I was tackling those posts that were in Instagram. I would make a small watercolor at home, and this wasn't intentional, right? It was like, oh, when I can get back in the studio. And then if I'm not able to get back, I can probably paint about that big at home, or I could sneak to the studio. And then the idea had been that eventually it would be these big, real paintings. And the reality is it is a continuum where you're always kind of just in the middle of something. And so now they don't have to be linear in that way, that each of them stands on their own. And that each can be a little bit different. There was initially an idea of like, this one must match the Instagram post, and that must match the next one, and that must match the next one. And that's not really how abstraction works. That's not how creative process works. You know, I'm fascinated with musicians that might re-record the same music multiple times. So it's not just the live version and a studio version. It's the editing, it's the remixing, it's all these other layers of nuance that really bring the thing forward. And so for me, this has been that kind of experience in terms of the works that you see in the Spelman exhibition. And so it's nice to then have these works paired with other contributors through the amazing collection, the permanent collection that's here, and Karen's selections of pairing different artists with the work. And so to me, that really does feel like a kind of extension of the way that this book has evolved, where you're getting these dialogues across other people's opinions, other people's kind of reactions to things that, you know, I'm very clear on why I said them, but, you know, what might they mean? And I think we talked about this earlier. It really helps as artists. It helps you grow. You had the great fortune of seeing the students today, and maybe you can talk about that a little bit. But that helps you not only think about the work you've already made, but then also what that might lead to, right? Like it's not necessarily an A to B. You might absorb this, and we might see this 3 albums from now or in a different way. So maybe just share with the audience a little bit about the class you were able to engage with today.
I was really lucky earlier on to go to see the some of the students in the contemporary and modern dance school, and they had been making work around Black femme, and they had been looking at visual artists, and they had also been working with musicians and looking at specific moments in choreography. And the course tutor was saying that she gave them a sort of deck of cards with these different musicians on, and different visual makers, choreographers, and artists, specifically photographers, and that she would just sort of deal the cards, and then they would be able to put together this music, and they ended up using 2 songs of mine, and they also used some songs by Esperanza Spalding. And so I was able to just be in the space and to see these women, and also I have to say one thing about being in this kind of space, that it is so as a total one-off for me, because I always try to explain about, I live in England and my dad's family is Caribbean, mum is English. So it's like my only all Black spaces are family, like just my dad's side of the family. Say like I'm going to it's my dad's cousin Terence's wedding. So that will be a mostly Black thing, because it'll be, my grandmother and grandfather, they had, 5 children, 6 children, and then, those kids have kids, and then there's all the different intricate family relationships, but so I associate all Black spaces with family because there are no other all Black spaces in the UK at all. Mm-hmm. Not an institution, so certainly not a university. Maybe you would get a church, like a church might be, but it would still be in a neighborhood that was more, the neighborhoods just have developed in a really different way. And obviously we talk about this a lot, and you have much of a history of understanding of, specific, like a redlining. That didn't happen in the UK. So communities are organized, economically. So that will mean maybe in a particular tower block in London, say, as people know about Grenfell, which was a big tragedy that happened in London. The inhabitants of that tower block would be sort of multi-ethnic. That there aren't just like, there's not an area in London you can just be like, oh, this is all black, or this is all, like Bangladeshi and Pakistani. So it's really amazing for me to be in an institution that's all black, but, like a sort of, and then to be a mostly female. So it's just like, I feel like I'm on another planet right now. That's what I have to kind of explain to you. It's like planet aunties and cousins and, planet grandma. It's really, but then everyone's like, knows loads of stuff about like feminist art, and so it really
Archives.
is, yeah. But archives. So it's like, sort of academic world. I went to a university in Leeds. I did English literature, but that was a mostly white space. Of the 300 people on my course, like I'm scanning the. I think there was one other boy who was the same as me. Like he had his mum was Ghanaian and his dad was white. Like I can't, when I see that lecture hall in my mind, it was just me and him and like 350 other non-black people. It wasn't unusual for me to be in spaces like that like my whole life. So like I say, this is like being on another planet. So then like Spelman, and then all the dancers are black girls, it's just like, but that was today, that happened today. And they were all wearing like slips, kind of like underwear. They were wearing these different kind of beige underwear things. And I have this song called He Will Follow You with His Eyes.
That's Aya's favorite.
Oh, yeah.
Daughter. She said,
I really like this song. And I'd found this object in the Stony Island Arts Bank, and it was from Valmore, which was this cosmetic company that started off in Chicago in the 1930s. And it was a cosmetic company that sold mostly to black men and women. And it has these absolutely elegant line drawings that were made by Charles Dawson, who's a celebrated black artist.
I'm going to go to your album cover.
Because it seems we're talking about that.
Yes.
But yeah, he was a very celebrated artist. He was the only black artist to show at the World's Fair. And he had drawn all this amazing work on all these products. I was really drawn to the products. And they were, skincare, hair care, and they'd be sold door to door. So someone would knock on your door with a basket and see if you wanted, the moisturizer or the perfume. But they had all these intriguing titles, so the perfume will be called something like Follow Me Boy or Look Me Over. And the advertising copy read a certain way that's written by, the owner. And it would say things like, his eyes will follow you across the room. And I really liked this, when it was about selling wigs and of course, because of the context, when I was looking at these products from the 40s, there were a lot of hair straightening products. There were a lot of skin lightening creams. And I was thinking about what it would be to be a woman, have someone knock on your door and sell you these products, but it's a particular kind of beauty, which is, a white adjacent beauty that it excludes you by its nature, but that you can get a step closer to it by buying this thing or that thing or the other thing. So the song that the students were performing to today, half of the song is the woman who's very much under the spell of Valmore and everything that can bring, health and success and happiness. And it starts with this voiceover. It says, ladies, don't you long for love? Be irresistible with the brighter, attractive beauty everybody admires, and soft hair that invites his caress, all that's attract, arouse, tantalize, and draw from him a hello, beautiful. And this is, just from the print advertising of the day. So these young women on the course today, they had these cigarettes, and they're just like moving around the space in this kind of like seductive way, but it's very outward, male gaze facing. So, and then halfway through the song, there's this disruption. There's this kind of sonic disruption And it's, you know, so at the end of the song, it's saying, you know, if you want to run to Sweet Georgia Brown, do, but I'll be smouldering, and then this happens, and in my plum red lipstick, my black hair kinking, my black skin gleaming, and it just repeats these words over and over. And so there was this moment that happened in the dance today where the dancers went from this very elegant sort of outward facing thing to like when it got to my plum red lipstick, you know, then they suddenly were just like in the mirror looking at themselves, and the dance, the whole language of the dance changed, and it went, they were lying on the floor, they were rocking their pelvises, you know, the skirts were coming up. It was just so sort of juicy and, you know, embodied and kind of much less outward facing.
Interior.
Yeah, it was more like, it was interior, and it was kind of like, it's more individual, it was bolder, it was sort of more, it was stronger. And so I loved seeing how they had taken in this, these two disparate versions of femininity, one which is trying very much to sort of attain a kind of style of beauty and behavior, and that's obviously down to everything, you know, how you move, how you dress, how you speak, how you style your hair, your deportment, you know, how you tuck in your pelvis to make your bottom tuck under, and all of the stuff demure into suddenly this really sort of free and you know, aware of one's own sort of beauty and sexuality. It was really amazing to sort of see that come to life today in this parallel world, which is the world that you all live in. I guess you're in and out of it, yeah, all the time. But it's amazing to sort of it's amazing that institutions like this, and I know that, you know, there aren't that many, but, you know, Spelman is so famous in the UK, and, you know, it's a sort of a very special place. And again, a place that we wouldn't and couldn't have, you know, you can't establish that at this historic moment. So, yeah, it's amazing to watch that dance today and just see the students in the music transform.
I mean, for me, I think that, you know, I trained as an architect, it was an alternate world in and of itself, but, you know, it's always a kind of toggling between a speculation and a reality. So in order to make the most beautiful buildings, you have to have imagined something that doesn't exist, or maybe sometimes has never existed. And so you're going back and forth. And so much of the work I'm constantly making is jumping media or going back and forth. But I can't remember who I was sharing with today. I very infrequently expose that to people because they get confused. And if it's people of power, they usually try to tamp down. Well, if you do that, you can't possibly do that. You can't be good at this and this and this. So I'll stay with your brain. We'll just talk about this today, and then we'll add this in. So the project sort of exposed me in that you see that I'm working 3 ways at one time. But it's because I enjoy the absorption and the confusion and disorientation. And I know that, you know, just the way you're talking about today, but in general, you know, that's a lot of your process. For me, that's true artistry. You know, there's so much that we see today that's not true artistry. Kendrick is here. I count him as a true artist, but there's so much that can be manufactured or kind of packaged, and there's a kind of instantaneousness to the way things work. And so while all of this is fantastic and, should I make it go back? I messed it up. Help me. You know, it's instantaneous, but it's also sort of like an evolution of a process. This was a 2-year endeavor to work with Spelman. You know, Black Rainbows, at least the portion in which I got involved, had already been in year 2 or 3 before it came to being. And so I think I just keep underscoring that that's how art really works. It's not a kind of continuum in a way where it's like an A to B. I'll just go backwards. I won't go forward. I was just going to keep cycling through some of the images so that the audience, you know, could kind of see some of the work.
And then I want to jump a little bit to the idea of a publication, and we saw the archive earlier. The archivist was here giving us some of, just a little taste. It was just like blown away at the idea of this thing being a repository. But I think the book as a form, as an artistic form, also was so important, not only for a kind of another medium, but also to memorialize or to talk about legacy. We were talking about legacy earlier. And so the book you all have is one of what I imagine to be many. The storefront iteration was about the street. It was about a kind of happenstance public engagement. And so the feeling of the book, it's chipboard, which we used in architecture school. It's like a thicker version of that with a little bit of a finish. So it's a little bit sidewalk or street, or the storefront itself is a kind of raw concrete. And so the first thing you open up onto is what you would have stumbled across if you turned the corner. So you don't start with a preface and or this or that. That kind of comes in the middle after you've stumbled. You can start at the end. You can open it to any page. And that really is the way that it felt on the street. And so it's important to me to make sure that translated. So Polymode was amazing graphic design firm in Los Angeles, really brought that to life. And we were fortunate enough, they created a typeface and sort of a way that the captions worked. And so when we were bringing the show to Spelman, we asked them to extend that. And they very graciously were able to translate the way that it would work on the street to the way that it should work in an exhibition space, when individuals are engaging the work in a very different way.
I really wanted to ask you a question.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you a question about these titles.
Yes.
Because, you talk about, and people talk about your work as being color. You're interested in color and thought around color. And I am obviously interested in words. And so when I see those titles, that to me is like a whole, that the title is like right in the middle of the page, and there's only a few things coming off before that's like, it's a whole poem. The title's a whole poem. The title's a whole poem. And then, or the titles are sort of, when I think of poetry, I think there's something about the form of poetry that it's a sort of distillation of bigger ideas. When you read a brilliant poem and there's maybe 4 or 5 words chained together, and those words, a long form writer might have taken, a whole book to say what the poet can say in 5 words. And that's what I see in these painting titles. There's a kind of poetry to them. And so I wanted to ask you about that part of your practice. Where does that sort of word placing come from? Where do those ideas come from? Or how do you work at a title? Does it pop into your head, or are you taking like a big amount of experiences and compressing it? Like how are you getting to these titles?
I mean, I don't know if I should say it's American Blackness, but I do think there's clearly, and Chicago's acclaimed Chicago for everything, so I'll say it's Chicago-ness. But it's a little bit of the dozens, it's a little bit of clapback, it's a little bit of call and response, and so I do find that it kind of came in a cadence, and so the overwhelm and the trauma of what was happening in the real world, it's almost like this punching. It's like a defense mechanism, So what you can't do is tell Black people what they're not going to do. This is like me talking to the television.
Yeah.
It's like, and today, President says, like, but you can go ahead, do all of that. What you can't do is tell Black people what they're not going to do. So what I'm going to do is just going to sit here. I'm not going to do any of that. And then my husband's like, okay, there she goes again, on the TV. And then I get in on the kids. And what you can't do, I'll cookie you. You're not going to eat another cookie. This is that kind of energy. And then you realize that that's a kind of shared experience. And so I saw Guion sneak in earlier. That's my partner in getting in trouble, creatively crime in Chicago. But there's one Black that says first and last name on the board. So in Chicago public schools, and I don't know about across the country, at a certain time when you were acting up in school, the teacher's not going to interrupt the lesson. She's got 30 kids, whether it's this classroom management. So she just quietly goes and writes your first name on the board, and then we're still with the lesson. And then and okay. And then maybe it's a middle initial, or maybe it's your last name. And then you are in trouble.
Right.
And it's,
If she managed to fill
she
the whole-
manages,
yeah.
It might be a long list that day.
Yeah.
Might just be one name.
And as you
John's
see the
name might have
first
been
name,
often.
you see your first name go up, you think, I don't want her to write my surname, so I'm going to be
Right. Or maybe you accelerate it so your whole name gets up there. I don't know. So what was so magical about social media, and I'm not a social media queen, is that you got the call and response instantly online in a way that you can't get in the public sphere, right? And so there were frequent contributors to the responses. And so one of them is a favorite of mine, Colleen Smith. She's an artist, an amazing filmmaker, experimental filmmaker. And so in the book, there's an interview with us where we do a full interview where we talk about the project and the process. And she helped us kick off the thing. But the titles come from that. So there was a conscious effort to make sure that I'm not saying Black cliches. So it was very interesting. As the project evolved, people would send me things that they wanted me to say because they've heard them before. And it's like,
I don't want to, if someone,
no, first of all, that's not original. Like, you got to show and prove, right? So you can't do that. But also, they really were trying to be a very strategic way of both poking fun at things, but allowing questioning of Blackness that only another Black person could do. So you'll see they say, you, I, we, used to, always, sometimes. So using this wordplay to somehow, sometimes involve everybody, sometimes exclude. Nikki's here. Nikki is the owner of, I buy my pork rinds from Whole Foods. So what Black is that? So there's a, right, it wasn't Nikki that said, but somebody said, I think a woman I didn't even know, she said, you see me in the Whole Foods? So this kind of like high and low.
Yeah.
You pray over your pork chops, and so, very rarely would I make two in a day, but sometimes it was like a lot going on. So you had to get like something very serious and then some sort of levity at the same time to kind of balance it out. Or there's some that are like what I would call diptychs. So there's a few that say things like, I'm trying to think of a good one. Oh, it says, since we invented CP time, we can never be late. Since we invented CP time, we are always late.
Yeah.
So there's like these kind of these ends, but it allows people to kind of question where they fit in the whole thing. And so it's really interesting as early on, everybody's like, yeah. And then you would see white people starting to question whether or not it was their space. So early on, they would say things to like affirm or confirm that whatever I was saying was okay. And then there was some point, it was like, she talking about us? She's talking about us. We shouldn't say anything. It was like, we should just be quiet, And so it's a mastery of all of that, but it really does come from like Black comedians, everybody's uncle whoever that's at the barbecue always with something, Bernie Mac, like all of these things are like part of my DNA, and so they come out, I think, in this way in terms of the language. But for me, it really was a coping mechanism first and foremost, but it just happened to be something that I have a strength in. The difficulty sometimes was then understanding how to translate that into these decisions. So the little quick snapshots were really helpful. They were like a crutch, because then I just had to match the square. I didn't have to overthink.
Yeah.
What does 4 or 5 ways of Black look like? And like there could be nothing more beautiful than it. Like, this is one of, I'm supposed to have favorite children, but this is one of my favorites. So I think I would not have been able to come up with this painting from that caption without that kind of intermediary of just instinct. And I think that's when the 20 years, 30 years, however long we've trained, just instinct, right? You kind of know. How did you know you wanted the song to split and give these two moments? How do you know, like you say, in this kind of circle and ending? Maybe that's your thesis for all of your work, but you might do it in different ways. And so for me, that's really what that evolved into.
I have another question for you.
Yes.
And it is, it's something that I found. I found when I was making Black Rainbows that the rules that I had made for myself gave me so much freedom. You know, the fact that I was like, right, every song on this record has to be inspired by something that happened in this building or an object that I find in this building. Every single song has to be that. But because it's that, I can do whatever I want. This thing's going to be like a sort of elegiac jazz ballad with just piano, and this thing's going to be like a schoolyard hand clapping thing, but then it turns into this punk song and it goes back and forth, and this thing's going to be like a squelchy synth thing, and this thing's going to be a 10-minute musing on the rock churches of Lalibela. Because I felt like nobody could call me on it, because I'd be like, yeah, but it's this. I just made this rule. And so I wanted to talk to you about rules. How important is concept? And I think I know the answer to this question, but sort of how important is the concept or the rule for you? Like you make it has to be this, and how does that bring you freedom? And how do you decide what the rule is that you're going to make for your work? You know, you're in each case giving yourself a very specific task. Like in this case, you talk about specific blacks. And, you know, how important are those rules for you, and how much freedom does it give you? And how do you think has a rule come to you?
So I don't know if the rule is because I'm a goody two-shoes, or the rule is from architecture school where you have to justify everything. So even though there doesn't need to be the reality of making this space stand up and not harm anybody, you don't really need rules that are not about gravity and structure. But to infuse meaning and soul into a structure, you have to start with some kind of concept or idea. And so in order to test out the efficacy or the success of the idea, you have to set some rules. At least this is what they told me, and I bought it in architecture school. So you had to have rules, and then when you're presenting your project, then you have to set the terms for everybody, and you have to demonstrate that you have successfully executed the terms that you set. So it builds in the metrics if you do it right. Or you could just make the building and then do it in reverse, which is what we figured out by the 5th year. You can make what you want, and then you're like, the rules. But so I tend to set a lot of rules. It has to be like this. It will use this. It will do it in this way. But the rules are always something that will fail inevitably in order to expand. So I now know about myself the most successful things break the rule or fail. So I still have to set the rule up, or I get nervous, and then I break the rule. And so the initial rule was it must start with the watercolor. The watercolor must match the caption in the square, and then the square, and then this, right? And it must be oil, and this must be watercolor, and you have to be a square, and it had to be. And then at some point, I did it. And it's like, well, okay, well, I guess we don't need to match them perfectly again. So what else? And so now the freedom that each one can be their own thing, or that there might be multiple readings of the same words or the same parameters, gives me that freedom to kind of expand and then make variations on the same thing. But then there was angst about doing that. So even though no one knows any of these rules, it was like, can I have 2 versions of it? I'm not sure. Can it be black and white in color? I'm not sure. You know, so a lot of neurosis that I've just accepted as like part of that process. But I think the idea of setting up some sort of terms as a way to begin and then being able to break or liberate from those is something you'll see over and over again in this body of work. And then I think just the work that's made in general. You know, even the idea of within making the book, like, you know, we're going to make a book and it's going to be about these 12 things, going to tell this story. And then the decision to kind of just like hand it over to this young lady who'd never done anything like this. And it's like, okay, make it right. You know, and she's like, oh, okay. You know, it's sort of like then this decision to make this call and response. And that means that you don't get to control what format and what is being said as a reaction. And that felt very authentic to the way that the process works, which is very different than my intuition, which is to get the top scholars in hypertension to write about fork rinds and the you know, like, like we've seen that book 100 times, you know, and so to set the rule and then to break it, I think is the system I know that works now. Okay, that's a great segue